All right, we have a new brand joining Mike's Big Martial Knife Exploration Journey today, and you can tell from the title we're talking about a Cudeman Bowie. Cudeman was recommended by a couple of my viewers. Definitely keep those recommendations coming. Today we're talking about the model 106M with the micarta scales. Now, my initial impressions are, yes, it's an impressive knife, but I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. So where are my trepidations coming from? Well, Cudeman, and I'm assuming how that's pronounced, made in Spain, could be Cudeman, if you know for sure, definitely let me know. But these knives are made out of German molybdenum vanadium, MOVA, steel. Now, MOVA, according to my research, maxes out its HRC hardness at around 56, 57, and my test files are saying, yeah, it's somewhere in that range. But, okay, Mike is just not a fan of hollow ground blades. And I knew this was going to be a hollow ground blade, but I didn't know it was going to be this hollow ground. Yeah, I'm going to call this one an eggshell hollow grind, because there is only, on a knife whose spine is 5 millimeters thick, there is only a millimeter, barely a millimeter of steel behind that edge for a full centimeter up that grind. I don't know how that's going to hold up. But in general, okay, this is shaving sharp out of the box. Against paper, yeah, I cannot deny it's a slicey knife. Against cardboard, let's see. I expect to have some binding with hollow grinds, and yeah, I'm getting a little bit, but it's not bad. I guess for me it's more of a taste thing. It's like one of my friends say, you know, you got to try these oysters, they're really great. And I'm like, well, that's a very relative scale, you know. Or maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it's more like, well, in my part of the world, a lot of people really love super bitter hoppy IPAs, and I just don't. But, you know, after I've had a few, I don't mind them so much. So maybe I'll learn to love this. We'll see. Let's talk about the sheath. I've got some problems with the sheath. It is attractive. It's a nice, thick, black leather with red stitching accents and nice elephant logo stamped into it. What are my problems with it? Well, one, yeah, I really just don't like this closure versus the diagonal thumb break strap. It does get in the way drawing and resheathing the knife. So, but okay, so look at the shape of the sheath. It tapers downwards towards the tip, right? The knife does the opposite thing. And what's happening here, first of all, the fit is really, really tight. I've been trying to break it in, but still kind of struggling. Still really difficult to insert and withdraw. But when it's all the way in there, yeah, that edge is really pressing into those stitches right there. And there's no other reinforcement, no rivets or anything down this end. So that's a concern. Also, we'll talk about this in carry and handling. Had this problem with other knives with that big, wide belly. When you have a really tight sheath, and especially we're talking about, well, for knives of this length, I've really come to enjoy the dangler system versus the solid belt loop. Yeah, struggling on the draw. I am getting some snagging with that belly. So yeah, the edge of the knife, which is very keen, is cutting into its own sheath, and I don't know how that's going to play out over time. Before I run my impact and durability tests, let's talk about specs, fit, finish, build quality. And the first number I'm going to throw out at you, $100 US is what I just paid for this at Chicago Knife Works. I'll put the link down in the description below. For a good quality, sizable, solid knife like this, I feel like that's a really good deal, and we'll see if this one meets those expectations or potentially exceeds them today. Well, we already talked about the steel and the hardness and the edge geometry and my concerns about the edge geometry. And blade thickness 5 millimeters, which is true of the full tang, which is visible all the way around. Blade length, website says 10 inches. I'm measuring 9 7/8, 25 centimeters. We'll talk about that missing eighth of an inch here in a second. Widest point in the blade, if I'm measuring just before the clip point drops off, that's 2 inches wide, 5 centimeters. Now, finish of the blade, already talked about the edge having a really fine, keen secondary edge bevel. Talked about my concerns about the hollow grind, possibly being too hollow. But otherwise, the lines are really clean. The polished satin finish, really well done. Moving down to the friendly end, well, shall we say, unfriendly bit of it. Guard. All right, lines, seams fit. Everything's very well done, very tight. No egregious gaps. But yeah, the edges of the guard all the way around are really, really sharp. And that includes, yes, it does overhang the grip scales on either side. So I'm definitely feeling that when I choke up. Is that going to be painful under the impact of stabbing and thrusting? I expect so. And therefore I expect I'm going to be doing some polishing and some rounding. Speaking of changes, all right, there is a nice swedge on the back of the blade, but there is still about a millimeter and change of blunt there. Am I going to go ahead and put one of my chopping edges on the false edge? Probably. But back down to the friendly end. Okay, grip length, measuring the whole thing, that's 5 inches, 12.5 centimeters. Overall length, 15 inches, 38 centimeters. So that extra eighth of an inch, well, that's the guard. Weight, 19 ounces, 538 grams. So it's got a bit of heft to it. Not my lightest knife, but not my heaviest in this size class. Point of balance, 3/4 of an inch north of the guard, about 2 centimeters. So a little bit into the blade. We'll talk about that, how that feels in martial handling, and also how it feels in my impact tests. But speaking of feel, back to the friendly end, lines built very clean. No seams, no gaps, no hot spots. And I've seen this on other Cudeman products and other Spanish-made knives. Just this little extra visual flair. Black G10 scales, but then there are these red underliners. Give it a little bit of color accent. Just to really appreciate those touches. Secured with what look like a couple of hex screws and a hollow rivet for putting a lanyard through. Haven't tried to take anything apart yet. Everything's tight as is. We'll see how it does under impact. But as for feel, okay, so front to back, those lines are very straight, but the sides have just really nice rounding, taper, and swell. So in hand, my initial impressions are it feels really, really good, except, you know, where I'm colliding with those sharp corners of the guard, but that's something I can do something about. We'll see how it feels under impact. All right, I am a little bit concerned about how these tests are going to go because of how, well, seemingly unsupported that edge is, but I have seen other YouTubers review not only other Cudeman products, but this knife specifically, and put it through a lot harder testing than I'm about to do, and it did just fine. Impressively well, in fact. So, let's see how it goes. All right, I think I'm feeling better about this. Wiped it off. Not a scratch. No damage or diminishment to the edge. First test. Thrusting and stabbing into lapel. Stab him several inches of heavy cardboard backed up by compressed brown bag paper, backed up by wood, and as expected, there was some uncomfortable kickback from the guard in all of the grips I used. I used 2 forward, 2 reverse. So forward grip, standard grip, edge away from me, and North American Bowie style edge towards me, and then I did the same thing in the reverse grip. Penetration though, oh yeah, really impressive against my pal. But I'm probably going to have to round off some unfriendly corners here. Haven't done that yet. I did the bamboo test last. I went straight to carving, shaving, chopping boards, and oh my, this did a fantastic job. Baton some firewood, yeah, through that initial, one of the things I get with hollow grinds is some bind when that initially bites in and then widens out, and yeah, I was getting stuck there for a second, but once it got past that point, it did really well, and yeah, it took 0 damage doing that. Now, these are not extensive bushcraft tests, but they do tend to give me at least a sense of how the knife will survive utility and field use like that, and also any painful kickback into me. And the answer was no. It was really comfortable, very confidence inspiring to not only carve but to chop and split with. And then finally, the one I was most nervous about, the bamboo test, which is potentially abusive. I'm trying to see if I can intentionally induce a chip or a roll and a fragile edge. And this is where I expected some failures, and I got none. I thought I was seeing a little micro glinting, and I went a little harder than I usually do just to be sure, but it wiped right off, and as you saw, the edge is just perfect. So let me go ahead and around the unfriendly corners on the guard, I will put my chopping edge on the false edge, and we'll talk about martial handling. Down to the unflattering waistline view so we can talk about carry, and I'm going to say, again, I'm not a big fan of this sheath. Doesn't really fit the blade. I'm getting a lot of shaving off the spacer where the belly's cutting into it. Yeah, it's just not shaped to fit the blade very well, so there's a failure. But it's only really allowing me at this point, because it is so stiff, to do a straight vertical draw, because you've got that wide belly. If I get any canter twist in the draw, I'll get that belly snag. So I can draw it straight up at this point with the break-in that I've done. But yeah, that does kind of overcrank my old arthritic shoulder, so I'm not liking it. I can draw it in reverse grip just fine. But any kind of twist or cant, if I try to go for cavalry draw, yeah, I'm going to get that snag, and it's going to cut itself up even worse. Now, can I just shove it into my belt or waistband Facone carry style? Surprisingly, this sheath is just a bit too chonky for that. It doesn't feel comfortable or secure. So I've been doing it more on my belt and just living with it. Speaking of living with it, it's only been a couple of days, and already that pretty red stitching, I'll show you close-up pictures, is coming unraveled. So the blade is definitely cutting up the sheath. So I think I'm going to have to come up with a different option for it. Before we get into handling, let's talk about a couple of quick modifications I've made. I did put a nice chopping edge on that back clip point, and given the profile it was already on there, it was not too hard to do, and I think it resulted in a really good functional edge. We'll talk about that in a minute. I also did some significant rounding, dehorning to the sharp, uncomfortable corners all over that guard. That does allow me now to comfortably choke up, and we'll talk about that in a second. But, all right, so this gets me back to my IPA analogy, where it's not something I would intentionally choose, but occasionally one of my friends will say, you really got to try this one is good. And then I'm like, okay, oh, well, actually, it's not so bad. And that's kind of where I'm at with this one. In feel and use, It surprised me. Now, the caveat, I didn't put it to any like really hard extended, bushcraft use, but other YouTubers have, and some of my knife friends have, and it's performed admirably, especially for that edge profile. So we'll see how it holds up for me, but right now, yeah. Now, it is kind of a solid, hefty knife for certain kinds of fine utility tasks. I did try to make myself dinner with it, and it just, yeah, it was kind of more of a chopper and not very handy for doing any fine slicing. It did it, but just felt way too heavy for that job. But for those chopping and shaving and other kinds of outdoor tasks, I put it to, yeah, held up just fine. But let's talk about feel. Yeah, has good blade mass and presence. So when I cut and slash and hack with it, chop with it, yeah, I feel like I've got, again, this is one of those knives that sort of crosses over into being a short sword. But it's also nimble enough that I can snap cut with it and back cut with it. So it's got that potential, especially now it's got sharpened clip point. Yeah, I can come back around and do that. And yeah, I've got enough mass that I could hit with the flat or the spine, flipping it around North American Bowie style. Yeah, that's got some authority to it. That's got some authority to it. And it definitely puts impetus behind those hooking strikes. Coming in with thrusting, talked a little bit about previous videos with the clip points, differences in what the two different grips do for thrusting angle. This one's really good in both for stabbing and thrusting, blade in either orientation, and it indexes pretty easily in my grip, so that's nice. Enough potential length and mass. I feel like I could get away with doing some limited parrying with it, so that would make it a good companion for another weapon. So there's something to think about in terms of using it, pairing it with some kind of sword or tomahawk. Food for future videos. But can choke up on it now reasonably comfortably, both locking my thumb above it for close-in work and hooking my finger over the guard, either edge away from me or, yeah, edge towards me. Now this is pretty good for utility use, but I've also found use for this in close range thrusting and stabbing. Obviously I'm not too worried about, the guard protecting my fingers, but there's again food for another video. How much should I rely on that at all compared to using the guard just to keep my own hands off the blade in a thrust or a stab? So, to be continued. Grip. Okay, the ups and downs of the grip. It is very comfortable. It works with the knife in cutting, snap cutting, blade alignment. Yeah, it feels good. It's really well matched to the blade, but we need to talk about, okay, transitioning to reverse grip. It's kind of massive, and the balance, doing my finger twirl, I can get away with it. Again, I don't recommend my finger twirl because it's not very secure to begin with, but pinch flipping. All right, there's a nice taper towards the top, but then it tapers off towards the end and flare back out again. And given the mass of the knife and no real place to index in a finger twirl, this scares me. I feel like it's going to pull itself out of my hand when I do that. So yeah, transitioning forward to reverse grip is just not very confidence inspiring. This is another one of those knives that's telling me, just hold it one way and don't get fancy. Definitely functional in both forward grips. Reverse grip, yeah, it's still useful. You can slash with that belly. It's got a really great belly. Obviously, stabbing is really good. Now I've got a nice false edge for hooking. If I reverse that edge, yeah, I can use that false edge for those kind of semi-karambit style strikes, if you want to call them that. Certainly got enough mass behind it to do that. And yeah, back cutting with the edge and what it does in penetration. Again, food for another video. Is there a difference in stabbing and thrusting penetration with the blade facing in either direction? So, another to be continued. But bottom line, I am unexpectedly impressed. I took a risk on this knife, and it wasn't a big risk. This is for what you're getting. I think this is an extremely good value. So in that alone, I absolutely recommend it. If you're looking for a good, high quality, durable, sharp Bowie knife, see if you can get your hands on one of these, because yeah, I do not regret spending the money on it at all. Compared to some of the other knives that have, well, disappointed me in this price range and, you know, even more expensively, this was again very surprising. And so far that edge, even though it kind of scared me, made me nervous. Might have to give IPAs another chance too while we're at it, but you know, all right. So if you have any questions about this, or you want to talk about other Cudeman products, if you happen to have this knife or other Cudeman knives, or other Spanish-made knives, I'm hearing good things about Joker and Muela, so let's talk about those too. Get our conversation going in the comments. But as always, thanks for watching, following my journey, subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, and I do hope to see you back for whatever the next installment is.